Good morning. My name is Doug Tackett, and I would like to share with you an overview of ProWorks from an engineering perspective. First thing I'd like to start off with is a question that we'd ask ourselves in the late 1990s as a company, and that is, how did we maintain our competitive advantage in a cyclic economy? And at that time, we were in a current upswing in the economy, and we had a couple of issues. First one was that we didn't have a structure that we needed to develop and efficient and effective processes that would actually improve with use. We pretty much, had a starting process, typed it up in a binder. People looked at it once, stuck it in the corner, and it collected dust for the next 5 years. It was not a good tool. Second, we were trying to bring on a lot of people quickly at a minimal cost so we could capture the upswing business. That was painful. And lastly, we had a whole lot of tribal information locked in people's heads that was not shared. As we expanded, it was diluted, and it was very ineffective. So we developed a piece of software. We called it ProWorks. It actually matured over a time of about 12 years. Currently, we have 3,000 seats licensed worldwide at a variety of different companies, doing very different processes. Start off in manufacturing, but we actually do touch base in accounting and some other things where we need some scheduling and control over the processes. What is ProWorks? The core question that most people ask. It's a work instruction system. It's been enhanced. We've added a lot of real-time process control so we can actually feed back from the process. There's a lot of incident management software, so when we have problems in the manufacturing process, that information is categorized, it's recorded. When we find a problem and a solution, then that gets recorded. We'll go into that a little deeper in a few minutes. It's a training management system. In one of our plants, we have 70 trainees, out of 300 people in the plant. And keeping track of who's training on what is just it's a nightmare without a good management system like this. It's a scheduling and to-do system. There's a lot of work you can do with Outlook if you're Outlook savvy, but things tend to, people's in baskets get full, things get dropped off. This is a little more of a structured to-do list. So if you're assigned a problem, let's say there's been a recurring problem in manufacturing and you need to address it within a week, that will not fall off your list until you complete it. It will remind you every time you log on. There's no running from ProWorks. We had a lot of needs for what we call simultaneous multi-language support. That is, we do actually have factories in China and India, and we need to be able to have, for example, an American or English-speaking engineer or German-speaking engineer work with Chinese production or Spanish production in Southern California, and so everybody needs to work in the language that they're most comfortable with, and it needs to be done at the same time in the software. We also need a multi-site support because we are a global company and we need our information shared across multiple sites. To do all of this, we needed something we termed structural integrity. And the core of that is that we needed a very, very robust, well-defined process for the different products that we were building, and we needed to use it consistently. You can define a process, but if it just sits in that 3-ring binder out in the corner, it's not getting used and it doesn't have any payoff for anybody. So we needed to use this same process everywhere. It doesn't matter what technology level or what language you're using or where they're at. We needed to make sure that we're all on the same page to begin with. Now once we did this, then our quality could be controlled by the process rather than by the individual craftsman. And that's really important because you can have a great craftsman building a product, but he gets diluted if you're trying to expand production. And of course, if you're trying to add another shift or move production to a secondary site, there's no way he's going to be able to help you. And if you lose him for some reason, all the information that he's learned is a total loss to the company. When you have a structure, something with structural integrity like ProWorks, then that information is retained even beyond the employee's tenure. Now all these processes, they're dynamic in nature. In other words, we're going to be making incremental improvements on these processes all the time. Now, some of those improvements we're going to be based upon recognizing material issues and resolving those. Some will be finding a slightly different way of improving the process. Sometimes that's going to be done by engineering and pushed down into manufacturing. Other times, manufacturing may discover better ways to do it. They can create a better mousetrap too, and they need to be able to push that back up into engineering. And everybody needs to be on the same page. So all these processes need to be dynamic in nature, and that's why we're database driven, not document driven. Our software, we need to learn from past corrective actions. We always have problems. We will always have problems, and we have corrective actions, or what I'll call like a workaround, to address those problems, and we need to learn those quickly so we don't have to relearn them the hard way every time they come up, because they might come up once a month, once a week, once a year. And that information needs to be shared with everybody. And then we need to be able to go beyond that, and if we have a reoccurring problem, we need to be able to say, flag everybody and say, okay, this is a problem that's happening 10 times, 12 times, 20 times a month. We need to actually go in and have tools so we can discover what the root cause of that problem is, hunt it out, address it directly, and then follow up on it to make sure that it's permanently eradicated. And that's really important. Or you do that, you just spend the rest of your life fighting fires. Now, the next part beyond structural integrity is what we call labor flexibility. And the tall pole in the tent on that is to be able to train new hires quickly. Every time you have a process upswing, you want to be able to produce as much as you can. You need to bring on new people, and unfortunately new people take a long time to train. And a traditional way that we used to train people was we would pair an expert with the novice and have them run through the process 3, 4, 5, 6 times until the novice became familiar with the process. And that had a lot of problems because first thing, the expert was having to run really slow for the novice to learn, and he was getting bored. And then of course the novice was having to race faster than he was comfortable, basically nodding yes to his instructor because he wanted approval, not really understanding what was going on. And so we prefer a self-paced type of training where we don't have that contradiction in paces. That also allows us to preserve the experts for more advanced processes, and allows the trainees, as I said, self-paced to whatever speed they need to learn. They're also learning in a kinesthetic learning style. In other words, they're actually doing it with their hands. A lot of people in production, they're kinesthetic learners. They're not going to learn by reading. They don't learn that well by watching somebody else do it. They need to actually do it themselves and have that physical interaction with the product, and this allows them to do that. Of course, when you do that, you need to have checkpoints, and this is where, as you define your process, you'll define some key points. So if a trainee is actually running the process, the trainee gets stopped at these key points and is forced to go to the manager or the supervisor to have them check their work and sign off on it. And of course, that's all gets tracked, and it's part of the training record. So you can actually go and see who trained who on what process, the day they trained them on, who signed off on it, and of course it controls things like, if somebody needs a refresher every 6 months or every year for a different process, you can put that into the mix. It's all taken care of for you automatically. Next thing in labor flexibility is what we call transportation. We need to be able to move a process. Sometimes it's as simple as just adding a second or a third shift, or it might be as complex as putting up another production line across the state or across the country or across the world. And in all those cases, we need to be able to unlock and share this tribal information that we've collected into these new locations or shifts. We need to reduce our language issues. A lot of times, even in the U.S., we may have people that are much more comfortable speaking Spanish than English, and if we can have the instructions in both languages, it just helps them a whole lot because they can just read their native language much faster than a secondary language. Of course, you get into like China or India, and it's just an absolute requirement. But at the same time, you need that same information back in English for the engineers and for the people that are primarily English speakers. And of course, we need to be able to automate these communications, especially between the shifts or between the locations. Somebody on the third shift might not know who the person to talk to is on first shift, but if they can press a button and the software already knows, hey, the responsible party for this part of this process is John Doe, and it'll send him the right communications. So it really addresses a lot of communications issues between shifts and locations. We need to talk a little bit about what we call outside quality. Now this could be as simple as like field service, where you have somebody running a process outside your factory, or it could be that you decided to outsource some parts or sub-assembly. And one of the things you want to do is share that same information that you've gathered inside the factory and share that with people that are outside the factory. And an example here is I've got ProWorks running here in the upper right corner, and that's just a very simple step in a procedure that would be walking somebody through. Now, if you have, like, let's say somebody in field service, they can bring up the same procedure in their web page, even though they're not online to the factory, or you can print it out in a PDF file so they can actually view it, or print it on hard copy if they need to, so that same information gets shared between everybody. And again, you're keeping the identical processes, so nobody's at a disadvantage. You're also sharing the tribal information that you've created in the factory with the people outside the factory, so they have a chance at giving the same quality outside the factory as in. And it also works both ways, because if let's say you've outsourced something to a vendor, you're going to be able to see where he's running on his batches of product for you, and if he's running into problems, you're going to see it in the database that he's got problems before he actually reports to you and reports a problem that he's going to be late. You already know that he's got an issue because everything's done in real time. Again, this comes back to what we call workflow transparency. We want to be able to see inside the process. And a real typical graph here that it jumps out at you right here that you've got one process here that's running behind already. It's a quarter of the way done, but you can tell just from the nature of the graph that, hey, that process is going to be late. So now you can go ahead and say, do I need to put more resources into it, or do I actually open up that job and take a look and see, are they having some materials issues or something? We need to be able to see that information very, very quickly. And it's transparent because the database is updated, every second of every day that they're running on jobs. So if you've got material issues, they're going to get pushed up through emails to their responsible parties almost instantly. The manager is going to see the real-time processing, so he's going to see if he's running behind schedule very quickly. We also gather everything for historical times and issues over the long term. So if you want to go onto the SQL database and mine historically what's happened for, let's say, the quality of a certain part over the last 6 months, you can do that. The automatic to-do list I mentioned a little bit just because people, they get overwhelmed by emails, and so by using a to-do list structure, if you've taken on to fix something in a process and you missed your due date, it's going to keep reminding you with a big flashing red window every time you log on, so you can't forget about it. I don't know about you, but personally I lose a few emails here and there just because there's too many of them to keep track of. Of course, everything's in the SQL database, so you can mine for it later. I'd like to talk a little bit about return on investment. They are intangible, so I'm not going to spend too much time on it. The key ones, though, are the ability to flex with the market conditions, and that means in two different ways. You need to be able to maximize your revenue by reacting to upswings. So that's mostly by bringing on people quickly and getting them productive within days, so you can really react to that upswing. The second is, if you do have a downswing, you want to preserve that tribal knowledge that people have gathered, okay, beyond the tenure of every single operator. Second, you need to increase the quality level of the products. It's constantly refining the process. When you start seeing problems and you actually have a recording of, gee, this has happened 12 times in the last month, then it's very easy to say, okay, now let's go ahead and address that issue. Whereas if you don't have that type of information on your fingertips, it tends to get lost, so you keep making the same mistakes again and again and again, and we prefer to learn from our mistakes. In terms of actual time, we have very granular information on not only how much time does it take for each step in the process, and that's neat, but also when you have a problem in the process, how much time are you spending fixing a problem? Because you might have a very simple quality problem, let's say on a part that maybe takes you a minute to fix, and nobody thinks anything about it. But also, if you realize that it's a minute at a time and you've done it 300 times this month, now you've got a significant cost to the company just because those rework times have added up. Nobody's paid any attention to it. Everything has to be quantitative data, so we can see what is my total process time, what are my total flaws costing me. It's not just a feel, but solid numbers on everything that you're running through your factory. And we want to also encourage the information flow coming back up from the production floor. The people in production, they actually a lot of times they have good ideas, they note down things because they're so close to the process, and they need tools to be able to push that up into management without making big waves. Just be able to jot down a note and say, hey, this is doing that, and maybe you should pay attention to it. They can do that, and it's going to ask them for it. It's a very easy tool to use. And of course, if you're going to have a new product or you're relocating an existing product, you're going to have a process that moves with you very easily, so you can relocate that production easily. You can see what's going on in the processes, so if you do have to move it or add a second shift or third shift, you can start comparing how they're working together and this type of stuff. And again, when you talk about relocation of processes, personally I've spent months in China and India. It's not fun. I would much rather define a process, get it down right, and give the proper information to them, so we're not spending weeks and months overseas trying to show them a new process. Again, it's communication between production and engineering. How does ProWorks function? The key really is in two halves. The first half is building instructions. It's all SQL database on the back end, and it's going to link to your ERP or CRM systems if you want. And we create what we call templates, which are created by experienced users with basic computer skills. It does not necessarily need an engineer. It definitely does not need a programmer. It's nothing more difficult than working with Word. A lot of drag and drop. We tend to use a lot of pictures and videos, so you can do it all text if you want. That's not really the recommended way, but it's a pretty straightforward process. Once you have that template, then people start using the instructions, and they have this media-rich instruction set. It's going to be pictures, it's going to be videos, it's going to be prints that pop up. Okay, but the really neat thing is that as they use this, every time they come upon an issue, they're going to be asked for what the issue is. They're going to be able to see what previous issues happened in that step, how they were resolved. And I'll show you this, and so it starts building up information on that process. And so what you start off with is, you might start off with a neat process, but you end up with something that's so much more refined and so much more productive after a couple months worth of use because of all the input coming from the operators. And of course you have all the process stuff such as material issues, how much time it took for each step, how much time it was for failures, this type of stuff. And so you can really tweak a process. If it's a ongoing process, you can really tweak it to the nth degree. That's kind of what I would call the engineering overview, and I have a couple of demos that I can show you to actually how it's used in real action. Also, please feel free to contact me at any time at my email here or at any of those phone numbers. Thank you.